Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since taking on responsibility for education on behalf of the Canberra Liberals, I have met with many parents, students, teachers and other education professionals. I have visited many ACT schools, government and non-government, and without doubt every school that I have visited or have been selected by the Minister's office for me to visit have been impressive as they are intended to be. They have dedicated, hardworking teachers, engaged students, bright and colourful classrooms and a positive can-do leadership team. As my motion leads with, teachers in Canberra schools work hard to support all students to reach their fullest potential and should be acknowledged for their dedication. And I make that acknowledgement now on behalf of the Canberra Liberals. But, as my motion also goes on to highlight, in the past 3 years at least, there have been no less than 4 reports, all independently researched, that paint a serious picture of academic underperformance in our schools. The first, prepared by Professor Stephen Lamb, was commissioned by the ACT Education Directorate. That report says on page 4, and I quote, "State and territory results show that after taking into account of intake and context differences, ACT government schools on average achieve negative results on every measure," end quote. That is pretty damning. However, I cannot tell if it is the least or most alarming finding in the report because large swathes of it are blacked out. And that is the report that is apparently openly transparent government has published on its directorate website. Neither can I say what recommendations Professor Lamb made to the ACT government because they also appear to be redacted. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the report is so sensitive, even the header, which generally sets out the title of the report, is redacted. So much for openness and transparency in our education system. And if this wasn't bad enough, the most alarming thing is that there appears to be little evidence that the ACT government took any notice of the findings in the report. In fact, the Lamb report was not the first to raise alarm bells about just how good or otherwise ACT schools were. The Australia Institute actually presented their paper to the ACT government in 2015, but the authors made it public in 2017 out of sheer frustration that the government was doing nothing with it and nothing about what they saw as how badly well-off Canberra schools fared against corresponding schools with similar socioeconomic profiles. In fact, they suggested that in 41% of cases, ACT schools were significantly below other schools. At the time of the public release in July last year, the Australia Institute's Andrew McIntosh said that the ACT government's ongoing future of education community conversation was not enough. The Canberra Times quoted him as saying, quote, "Given that things are getting worse, there's a desperate need for a public, detailed inquiry to find out exactly what is going on," end quote. The Australia Institute suggested 2 possible explanations for poor results in the public system. That the socio-economic scores used by the Australian Curriculum and Reporting Authority, ACARA, did not capture the true profile of the ACT, making comparisons inaccurate, or that teaching practices were to blame. The government ignored those findings, ignored the call for a detailed public inquiry to find out what's going on, and so last Friday, the same Professor McIntosh reiterated his frustration, again calling for more research to be done to come to grips with the causes of underperformance in ACT schools. If further evidence was needed, the ACT's own Auditor General in May last year also came to the conclusion that ACT government schools on average achieved negative results on every measure. She found that, quote, "ACT public schools are performing below similar schools in other jurisdictions, despite expenditure on a per-student basis for public schools being one of the highest in the country," and that, quote, "Since 2014, reviews of ACT public schools have consistently identified shortcomings in their analysis of student performance information and their use of data to inform educational practice. These shortcomings indicate a systemic problem," end quote. 3 reports in 3 years, all ringing alarm bells and indicating that the oft-quoted claim about the superior performance of ACT schools was a folly. In fact, if you count the lengthy detailed submission to the ACT Education Committee inquiry by Mark Drummond, well known for his passionate belief in the importance of education, that makes it 4 damning reports. So how does the Minister respond to these concerns from recognised credible researchers? Well, like any poor workman, she blames the tools. She sticks to her prepared script, which the Canberra Times quoted in their editorial on Monday of this week, namely that Canberra remains typically the highest or equal highest performer in the vast majority of assessment domains and year levels. And when challenged about declining NAPLAN results, she attacks the test as a trigger for stress, anxiety and depression among students. She is, not surprisingly, supported by the ACT AEU, who confidently assure me that NAPLAN is dead. And if 4 damning findings were not enough, wait, there's more. The ANU working paper by Professor McIntosh and Deb Wilkinson, published last month, makes a compelling case and confirms what the 2015 Australia Institute paper tried to tell the government. They point out that domestic and international research has repeatedly demonstrated that the academic performance of students is influenced by their socio-economic background, that is, the occupation and education level of parents and carers. Owing to the influence of these factors, the NAPLAN performance of schools should be compared with other schools that share similar socio-economic profiles. And Madam Deputy Speaker, when you do that and compare apples with apples, ACT schools are clearly not up to scratch. Their 2015 report compared the performance of high socio-economic status primary schools, government and non-government, in the ACT with statistically similar school groups, and identified a pattern of repeated underperformance over the period 2008 to 2016. The extent of the apparent underperformance was most acute in high schools and in writing and numeracy. The 2018 paper found the same issues. Their report says the analysis of the relative NAPLAN performance of government and non-government schools in the ACT supports the following conclusions. Government schools, there was systemic underperformance in government primary and high schools in NAPLAN over the period 2012 to 2016. The underperformance was most pronounced at the high school level and in writing and numeracy. The underperformance was relatively consistent across low, middle and high socio-economic schools. And the performance of government schools did not show any signs of improvement over the study period. If anything, there was a slight deterioration in performance in numeracy. More concerning is their claim that the ACT government has been aware of this underperformance of government schools in NAPLAN since at least 2015, and according to the Auditor General, perhaps even as early as 2014. However, the latest findings suggest the problems are more widespread than previously thought, extending across the socio-economic spectrum. But before the Minister gets up and starts her well-known disdain for NAPLAN and blaming it as the source of all ACT education failings, let me point out that NAPLAN is not the only testing tool used in ACT schools and not the only one that has shown declining performance. On the international stage, Australia has been ranked 39 out of 41 high and middle income countries in achieving quality education according to the United Nations Children's Fund report card. They found that Australia is falling behind in basic measures of teaching and learning. Only Romania and Turkey were ranked below Australia in education in UNICEF's report. What does the OECD's PISA testing say about Australian schools? PISA looks at the performance of 15-year-olds in reading, maths and science, as well as quality and level of access to early schooling in 41 European Union and OECD countries. The 2017 PISA testing report showed that ACT students' results are declining in real terms. Earlier PISA testing indicated similar declining results. In December 2016, PISA, which is the major global test of students' achievement, revealed just how far Australian high school students are behind their peers in the world's best performing countries. The report found that only 71.7% of Australian 15-year-olds are achieving baseline standards in the 3 key areas of education based on the latest PISA assessment, and only 80.3% of children are attending organised preschool learning for at least a year, according to 2014 figures. The 2015 report showed that the average ACT 15-year-old maths student was 1.5 years behind where they were in 2003. In scientific literacy, ACT students were 8 months behind where they were in 2006. In reading, they were 1.25 years behind where they were in 2000. From 2003 to 2015, the percentage of high performers in mathematical literacy has dropped from 27% to 14%. These results are replicated in the ANU paper released in August this year. So our declining NAPLAN results are echoing what other international testing is telling us. And since the 2017 PISA report and following the ACT Education Directorate's own commissioned research, what has the Minister done? Well, Ms Berry outlined in the Assembly last sitting what she had been doing in her Future of Education paper. She said she had had thousands of conversations with students, parents and teachers. But what has she learnt and what is actually being done? Well, there is little evidence of actual substance in her strategy. She said, and I quote, "I am happy to outline today that a big conversation has in fact been had, and the product of this conversation is a Future of Education strategy that lays out a roadmap for work over the coming 10 years. The ACT education system of the future will be personalised to each child. It will celebrate difference. It will take a holistic view of the people it serves, our children and young people," end quote. The 10-year roadmap. Does that roadmap acknowledge the work that has already been done by now, the 5 different reports that outline ACT's declining academic standards? Does that 10-year roadmap acknowledge repeated calls for a review into performance standards in our schools as a matter of priority? When the 2015 PISA results were made public, she suggested, quote, she would explore the information, end quote, but went on to say that Canberra is significantly above the Australian average and our declining performance is replicating similar trends in other jurisdictions. Or the other tested method, oh, but the other jurisdictions are just catching up to us. So that makes it okay then, does it? That while ever we are ahead of other states, it doesn't matter that we are now 39 out of 41 countries in education on global standards. That it doesn't matter that our maths students are 1.5 years behind where they were in 2003. That it doesn't matter that our percentage of high-performing students in maths has almost halved from 27% to 14% over 12 years. Apparently, it doesn't matter. Because you see, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not her fault. The Minister prefers to hide behind union objections to standardised testing, especially NAPLAN. She prefers to talk instead about how wicked NAPLAN is, and when pushed, it is either a line including the magic fix-all word equity, or another one she repeats, every one of our schools is great. If the Minister cannot even acknowledge that there is a serious and systemic academic underperformance in ACT schools, what hope do Canberra parents, students and the broader community have that she will actually do something about it? The Minister fails to understand that whether it is NAPLAN or any other assessment tool, they are simply indicators of whether we are on the right track, and for too long we've been on the wrong track. The Minister fails to acknowledge the overwhelming evidence of our slipping academic standards in the time ACT Labor has been in charge of education in the ACT. The Minister fails to understand that equity is not the catch-all buzzword miracle answer to everything in our education system. The Minister fails to acknowledge that we are now currently 39 out of 41 countries in terms of education outcomes in the OECD. And in failing in all these areas, she fails our future generation. The ACT needs a teacher-led, student-focused education system that will teach our students the fundamentals of literacy and numeracy, equip them with the skills they need for the future, and to foster a culture and expectation of rigour and excellence in education. Anything less is just not good enough. And the starting point, Madam Deputy Speaker, must be an independent review into where we are going wrong with academic performance. A review that will get us to the heart of why we are not performing. A review that will set milestones to achieve better academic outcomes. I commend my motion to the Assembly.
Ms Lee to close.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank Mrs Kickett for her contribution to this debate, as well as, of course, Mr Berry and Mr Rattenbury. Given that she's a mother to 5 children in government schools, Mrs Kickett is well placed to appreciate how they are progressing. It is no surprise that she and other Canberra parents have an uneasy feeling about where the standard of their children's education is and where it should be. That assessment has come quite independently from observation of their children's progress and without any prior knowledge of PISA results or the several damning reports. So does the minister know but is simply unable to face the reality? Is it because she doesn't know how to fix it? Of course, we will all continue to wonder because it is, after all, Private Members' Day. Once again, as we see every Wednesday on Private Members' Business, we have a furious rewrite of anything the Canberra Liberals wish to debate, and this motion, like my earlier motion on the H course, is no different. We have the usual: remove all words after this assembly, and then, like so many other motions, simply repeats words that we had in our motion, but in this case, there is one glaring difference. In respect of each report referenced, we actually listed the findings, all of which were damning. This government is simply unable to accept criticism, to acknowledge shortcomings, and so it is again with this motion. There is a dangerous progression to willful blindness, a stubborn refusal to admit things are not quite right. We saw it today in the health motion, and we see it now in education. How many months, years, hours of a debate did it take for the government to acknowledge what everyone else in Canberra knew, and that was that the ACT health system was broken and needs a board of inquiry to get to the bottom of the crisis? How long will it be for the Education Minister to accept ACT students are going backwards in real terms before she acts? Or is it okay for us to keep slipping so long as most of the time and in most areas we stay ahead of Australian states, completely ignoring our relative socio-economic advantage? What will it take to make her do more than have conversations and play with legislation? The evidence of her failure is there. What is not apparent is evidence to support her claims in part 2 of her amended motion. Ms Berry says the government has, quote, proactively inquired into the relative performance of ACT schools. It has responded to the Auditor-General's report. The minister is leading a national review of NAPLAN. But she is doing nothing about acknowledging her failures in our school system, and she never will because she doesn't believe there are failures. It's NAPLAN. It's inaccuracies in data recording. All our schools are great. And if the ACT is making the progress that the minister claims we are, why did respected researchers at the Australia Institute go public last year with the report they gave to the government 2 years earlier? They did that, they said, because they were frustrated that nothing had happened and nothing was happening. And they made the same claims again last week in evidence to the Education Committee. They made it clear things had not improved and would get worse if nothing is done. And nothing has been done, and nothing is being done. We have a 10-year plan, we have chats and conversations, we have tinkering with legislation, but let us not do anything that might actually flesh out serious weaknesses and flaws, something that may actually tell us why, despite our socio-economic profile, we are slipping. What is it the government is so afraid of us finding out? Repeating over and over that all ACT government schools are great doesn't in itself make it so. And when all else fails, as we have seen, the minister attacks my integrity, my honesty, and my intelligence. Because I had the nerve to call out her own flawed understanding of what equity in education means, i.e. not spending $17 million on a Chromebook for every student, I don't understand. Perhaps it is she who doesn't understand the clear, written in black and white findings in all the reports that I have spoken about. It cannot be any clearer. So if she does understand, then the only conclusion that I and the broader Canberra community can draw is that she is willfully ignoring these findings. And of course, the Greens have served up their usual, I agree with you, but won't vote for you. It is something that we have come to accept as an inevitability in this place. After all, they do need to stick with their coalition partner. Madam Deputy Speaker, I had an email the other day from a constituent who had returned from the UK and enrolled his children into the local government school. He wrote to me and said, and I quote, "Having been in the ACT government school system for 1 year after returning from the UK, I truly believe my child has gone backwards in both reading and writing," end quote. pretty damning. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have the potential to make every one of our schools world class. We have the teachers, we have the socio-economic advantage, and we are a small jurisdiction. But right now, and for some time, we have gone off track. And pie-in-the-sky dreamtime statements on the future of education conversations is not going to get us there. And clearly, the government is of no mind to want to find out either. It is not good enough for Canberra parents to be told ACT schools lead all other jurisdictions. Given our size, our relative affluence and the higher SES assessments of education and employment of parents, the ACT should be at the top. But it turns out we're at the top of a country that is struggling to keep up. We have such countries as Vietnam, Slovenia, Macau, Estonia ahead of us. UNICEF ranks only Romania and Turkey below Australia in education in the latest UNICEF report card. We have numerous reports that speak directly to what is happening in ACT schools, and still a blank wall from the Minister. Our two largest expenditure items in the ACT budget are health and education. Decent, hard-working taxpayers have a right to expect better performances from both. The Minister referred to education as an investment, and she is right. But every investment, and particularly the ones of public funds, must be good ones. There is no one who would think throwing money at something for worse returns is a good thing. It doesn't matter what it is. Instead, health and education appear to be in a race to the bottom in the poor ministerial leadership stakes. The amendments provided by the Minister are just another avoidance of reality, and Canberra families have to be content with the exciting prospect of another Dreamtime story from the Minister next February. I am disappointed, but not surprised at the lack of accountability of this Minister. We have seen it demonstrated already today, and I suspect we will continue to see it. This Minister is incapable of facing reality and addressing shortcomings, and in doing so, she does our teachers, our principals, our parents and our students a major disservice. Our hardworking teachers have every right to feel let down by the complete lack of leadership and accountability of this Education Minister. And in doing so, the Minister fails our future generation.